impulsive, habitual, even consuming. We find ourselves among the 600 million people who regularly use Instagram, among 59% of young adults who have an account, the majority of an entire generation. We, along with millions of our closest friends, engage daily in the Instagram system, which one interview participant called a mind game. The app is an image-sharing platform that allows users to upload photos to their profile and browse photos uploaded by friends and strangers alike. The system gives users access to the lives of other people, encouraging observation instead of interaction. This kind of observation leads to what researchers have called passive use of Instagram. Users, including those interviewed for this study, primarily scroll through the app and observe other profiles rather than sharing their own photos. So I knew that Instagram was overwhelmingly popular. I knew that I and other users engaged with it in unique ways. But despite that, I discovered that Instagram-related research has been limited. Most studies have focused exclusively on the negative aspects of the app. These studies have titles like Instagram, It's Just Sad, and they identify things like the association of Instagram with depressive symptoms and body image issues. Other research, like Sophia Caldeira's article, Identities in Flux, looks into the motivations for Instagram use, but it looks at close analysis of posts themselves. However, interview-based studies that look at Instagram are hard to find. Even fewer studies seek the reasons for Instagram's popularity or the motivations of its users, and none of the existing research has looked at one gender in particular. Most have concluded simply that men and women use the app differently. In short, the existing research has left the big questions about Instagram use unanswered. I discovered this and I responded by asking a question of my own. What motivates women at Mississippi College to use Instagram? I arrived at this research question after recognizing others that were unanswered. What motivates people to continue to use Instagram 7 years after its introduction? Why and how do they choose photos to post? What causes individuals to use the platform in different ways? I narrowed these questions down and arrived at this one I could find the answer to. I did not set out to find the universal motivations for Instagram use, but instead I focused on women at MC, an accessible group that represented the greater population of Instagram users. I chose to conduct my research through interviews, something that's rarely done in research related to social media, especially Instagram. I felt this was a unique and effective way to gain information about these women and the ways that they use Instagram. It was authentic and it reflected the self-representative nature of Instagram itself. Other studies have attempted to create exhaustive surveys or to gather information from the Instagram posts themselves. I didn't want to follow their lead though. Instead, I created a space where women could explain and in some cases discover their own habits and philosophies about Instagram use. Most specifically, they described to me the motivations behind the things they posted. After I received approval from Mississippi College's Institutional Review Board, I recruited volunteers through this flyer. I emailed the flyer out through Mississippi College Social Tribes, which presented my study to a diverse group of women. It ensured that the data would represent the women on MC's campus as thoroughly as possible. Any 18 to 23-year-old woman who attended MC and actively used Instagram was welcome to participate. I asked the women questions about how they use Instagram. For example, I learned how often they look at the app, how they use it, and how many followers they have. But the most substantial part of the interviews began when I said, "Talk me through your 10 most recent posts." I never looked at the photos being discussed. I did what I could to keep my own thoughts or even the secondary research that I'd done out of the way, and instead I left it up to the individuals to describe the photos, and I asked leading questions like, "How did you choose this photo specifically?" Or, "So you felt like you should post for that occasion?" And the answers came. I realized after the first few interviews that I already had a lot of information to sort through. Interviews had presented a challenge not in a lack of information, but in a lack of uniformity. I had the information I'd hoped for, these lengthy discussions about motivations, but I'd also gathered these interesting texts that represented individuals' personal philosophies about Instagram use. I began the process of coding this volume of data by looking for statements that answered the most narrow version of my research question. What had motivated these women to post photos on Instagram? After marking all the motivation-related language, I worked outward. I looked at the information the volunteers gave about their habits on Instagram, how many followers they have, how often they post. Created data sets like this for each volunteer, describing the details of their profile, some of the habits and opinions they discussed. This streamlined the rest of my coding process, giving me a framework that fit each of the interviews. The data sets contain quantifiable information like follower counts and average numbers of likes, but I also took notes from the interviews, marking various comments that would be worth quoting later on. As it turned out, the 8 women who volunteered for my study were not only active users of Instagram, they were avid users of Instagram. When I asked them how often they use the app, all of the women said they use it at least daily, but most described their activity as much more frequent. Several volunteers use strong, sometimes even negative language to describe the frequency with which they use Instagram. Phrases like too much or too many times to count were prevalent. However, despite their regular use of the app, most volunteers only post on Instagram once every 2 to 3 weeks. I learned that these women represented a variety of approaches when it came to their Instagram habits and the way they think about their own profiles. Some volunteers described clicking through every story at the top of their newsfeed, while others only noticed their close friends. Some volunteers had no idea how many followers they had, but a few named the exact number without looking. These were the individuals who saw their Instagram as a carefully curated representation of themselves. They described a certain look or aesthetic that they worked to achieve with their photos. Other participants declared these Instagram aesthetics to be, quote, way too extra, and they said they didn't bother. As fascinating as these philosophies were, my goal was to hear the thought processes behind the things these women posted. To find out what motivated women to post on Instagram, I had to create a system that would organize the motivation-related data I'd collected. In order to determine motivators, I looked at the language I'd initially underlined, and I compared it with a very thorough list of motivators gathered in the study called Identities in Flux by Sofia Caldera. Her research was a text-based analysis of Instagram photos, so I adapted some of her categories to better suit my interviews. Based on her work and my own, I ultimately determined that all the motivators my volunteers had discussed could be placed in one of these 4 categories: memory, self-representation, connection, and documentation. Memory and self-representation are internal or personal motivations, while connection and documentation represent external or social motivations. These categories enabled me to consistently code the somewhat varying data that had come out of my interviews, and they ultimately became the backbone of my results. They made it possible for me to answer my research question. So, what does motivate female NC students to post on Instagram? The results were overwhelmingly clear. Documentation was the biggest motivator discussed by the women I interviewed. It represents most Instagram use because the site was created to give individuals a convenient platform for photo sharing. However, the other motivators are still significant factors of Instagram use. They deserve attention, and I'm going to walk through them now, starting with the least frequent and working my way back up to documentation. The internal motivators, memory and self-representation, each represented 11 of the 80 total posts that participants discussed. Memory was a motivator described by another researcher as a protection against time, and drawing from Caldera's work, I defined memory as posting for one's own sake, to preserve and to remember an experience. Memory functions as a sort of internally focused form of documentation. Participants referred to memory by describing photos they just really liked, saying things like, I just wanted to add this to my feed. One participant described a photo she posted just for my own sake to look back on. This motivator is different from documentation because participants discussed these photos with no mention of other people or their opinions. It was focused entirely on self. The women wanted to keep a record of experiences for their own benefit. The other internal motivator is self-representation. This motivator led individuals to post photos in order to reveal or discuss something about themselves. Self-representation is different from memory because it falls into what researchers have called the identity construction aspect of Instagram. Individuals post photos with the motive of self-representation when they feel they have something significant to say or some way of presenting their personality in a photo. In some cases, these photos were more about the image itself than the experience. For instance, one participant posted because she felt like a photo showed her in her element. Another woman posted a picture as an outlet of emotions she was feeling for what she described as her own sake, not expecting responses from other people. Photos were shared because individuals were feeling confident or because they wanted to post something unique for the sake of their feed. This category contained a somewhat broad range of photos simply because people chose to represent themselves in a variety of ways. Connection was the second most popular motivator, and it's found when individuals post pictures with the specific intention to receive a response of some kind. Most often, connection photos were described in my interviews as related to birthdays or anniversaries. Nearly every interview included at least one photo posted telling someone happy birthday or giving them a shout out of some kind. Connection motivates posts that function as a public message to an individual. For example, one participant described a photo she posted specifically hoping for a comment from a guy she was interested in. And in that case, the photo was being posted with that individual's response in mind. And in case you're wondering, it worked, and he commented. Connection also takes the occasional form of self-promotion, invitations to click a blog link or to attend a performance. Ultimately, though, participants claimed documentation as the motive behind over half the photos they discussed. They post about experiences with the intention that their photos will be seen and be appreciated by others. In fact, 7 of the 8 women I interviewed used documentation language to describe the majority of their posts. I was able to identify this motivator by looking for language that referred specifically to other people. Generally, this showed up in phrases like, I wanted people to see or to know, to admire something that the individual had done or somewhere they had been. One participant said she posted certain photos because she was doing something interesting. Another shared a photo because she looked really good in the picture. This motivator also contained posts born out of social obligation instead of a simple desire to share. One of the women would say something like, I feel like I should post that we went to formal. Someone else actually used the word obligation to describe her intentions in posting about an event she had gone to. She said, I have to thank you publicly, in reference to someone who had taken her to an informal. Ultimately, one volunteer summed up the heart of documentation as a motivator by saying, we did something. Let me show everyone that we did something. This outward focus of most participants' Instagram habits was reflected in other parts of the interviews too, especially in the negative language they used to describe Instagram. They saw dangers in the fact that Instagram can be used to spread negativity or to serve as a distraction. One participant noted how it's easy for Instagram people to get into other people's lives, describing the convenience of seeing profiles of people you know and people you don't. Another participant discussed her own struggles with Instagram and commented on the fact that girls often post for validation from other girls. She had actually chosen to leave Instagram for a time because of the insecurity it had bred in her life. So overall, this study has shown that documentation is a huge motivator for most things posted on Instagram by these women and likely the majority of users. This knowledge is important and it's significant, but it also shows that there's more to learn. Further studies could be conducted about the individual philosophies that began to emerge in my interviews. Self-worth is also tied into Instagram use, and it affects all kinds of relationships in ways that have yet to be researched. Instagram is ever growing, and we must continue attempting to understand its effects. So from positive archives of experiences to dangerous expectations from followers, documentation essentially rules Instagram. This knowledge can enable individuals to be more aware of their own expectations and the way that Instagram is impacting their feelings and their lives. Rather than documentation for its own sake, this awareness can help cultivate purpose within our use of Instagram and other similar platforms. I believe in order to use social media well, we must be conscious of our motives. This study is only the beginning of the conversation, but I hope it promotes the kind of consciousness that leads to healthy and beneficial Instagram use. Thank you.